Daniel, really nice to talk to you today. We're going to be talking about your book, Zest, which is Climbing from Depression to Philosophy. Really amazing book. Congratulations, and well researched. How are you feeling now that it's been launched?
Thanks, Andrew. It's really great to be here. I'm feeling really good that it's launched, partly because the process of writing a book is one thing, but the process of waiting for the book to come out is another. And it feels a bit like you are carrying a sort of a spirit body along with you. So launching it is in some ways a real relief, because I can talk to people about things that I've been thinking deeply about, which otherwise were just sort of between me and my laptop.
Indeed. And essentially it's about your journey of somebody who seemingly on the surface of things, you had a very successful career, you had a family, but something was not working for you. And I wanted to begin by asking you how you would personally describe depression and how it manifested for you in your life.
I think that's a really well put question, because I suspect depression shows up differently for different people, and so there's no one formula for it. The way I experienced it is something I had to go describing in the first chapter of the book, but it felt like the color was drained out of my world, and not just in a sort of temporary way, and I just needed to wait to get the color back. It felt rather like the color had dissolved, as if it had been painted on, and I'd seen through to what things were actually like, and what they actually were like were grey. And so my experience of it was that I felt like I was seeing through the charade and the ritual and all of the sort of running around that we do in life, and that it really was meaningless. It didn't have, I wasn't sustained by what I had been sustained by, which was just racing after the next thing. I suddenly stopped and couldn't see the point in racing after the next thing. And therefore life just felt like one task after another, one thing that had to be done after another, but without the purpose or the reason or the basis or the meaning behind all of it. So it felt like something was missing, but maybe it was missing because it was just never there.
Did you have moments where you did feel happy? You could feel something amused you, or you had interactions with people that were positive, but overall your sense of well-being was negative? Or did everything that you and every person you interacted with, all those situations, did they seem negative to you?
It was the former. So it wasn't as if everything was relentlessly terrible. You know, good things would happen in life. I would eat nice meals. I would still enjoy spending time with my wonderful children and my wife and my family and friends. It's just that there was a gnawing sense that there was an emptiness at the heart of things, and that the joy that I was feeling was a charade, a little act of pretense, and a distraction. But as soon as I looked harder at things, all the paint would dissolve again, and everything would seem empty and as if I'd just looked away from the reality of things, if that makes any sense.
And those moments were larger for you than, I don't want to say the average person, but for someone with depression, those negative sides were perhaps out of proportion compared to the other things. Is that
That's right. Like depression really is a loss of perspective. I think even people without depression can see that. What I think is harder to see is sort of what that might feel like. But it's definitely true. A depressed person doesn't objectively have a harder or a worse life than anyone else. And in fact, my book is really about the fact that my life was distinctly not harder.
That moment where you recognized that there's a problem here for you, was that, at the time you realized that, was that helpful, or did it actually make you feel worse initially?
The latter. So when I first recognized, as you might put it, or just felt like there was this problem. My original response to that was a sense of deep isolation, as if I had worked out that for two people to really see and experience each other and understand each other and spend time together in a real way is so vanishingly hard to do. It felt like no matter what I tried, I was never going to penetrate out of the membranes between me and any other person. And I wasn't trapped because I'd fallen into a cul-de-sac. I was trapped because this is the form that we all live in.
There's a lot of grief in that, isn't there? Too.
Yeah, a real sense that a sort of a sense of tragedy in a way that what my depression had led me to was seeing the world in a way that wasn't really fixable.
I'm wondering about authenticity, because we are social creatures, and fitting in with others and following rules and conventions is a part of that socialization process. And we all have to do it, whether it's a family, whether it's at work. And obviously we can be different people, different aspects of our personality can come out in different surroundings and with different people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if we're politer at work than we are with our mates at the pub, that we're inauthentic at work. It means we're following a culture, or we're following an aspect of our personality that reacts in different situations. So how do you unpick all of that in terms of being an authentic person, given the complexity of the human personality and brain, I guess?
What a great question. So I spent a good 6 months thinking about just that question. Yeah. Somewhere in the book, I quote a philosopher called Thomas Nagel, who wrote a pretty famous essay where he basically said, if you really revealed, if you were just totally authentic in the way that you hinted at, Andrew, then just if everyone was, public life just wouldn't be possible. Like if you really walked around the world knowing what everyone was thinking about everyone else, it would be a total disaster. And in my sort of deep depression, that was a very depressing thought. That made me just think, well, the only way to succeed in life, the only way to be happy is just to stuff yourself down somewhere and just become a very good diplomat, a very good politician. There's a book that Robert Greene wrote called The 48 Laws of Power, which is a sort of a compendium of all the great cynical advice that is out there, from Machiavelli through to everyone else. And if you read that from start to finish, you can see that, one recipe for living well and succeeding in the world is just to be very good at having multiple faces and presenting the right ones to the right people. But I couldn't see that was a great way to live. Nor, Andrew, do I think that just sort of telling people a raw version of sort of what you are thinking at any one moment is a great way to live either. But I was worried about, was there sort of any other way to think about it? And where I eventually came to was that a lot of internal work needed to be done on how I was relating to all of my own thoughts. So I quote Jonathan Haidt, the famous psychologist, and his elephant rider metaphor. What he says is that we think that we are having opinions and deciding things about the world, and therefore most of our opinions are pretty reasonable, and if people disagree with us, they're probably unreasonable. But a lot of that is the expression of our deep tribal instincts, and our thoughts largely map our self-interest, sort of so far so Robert Greene, that people are very self-interested, and many people don't realize how true that is. But what Haidt says is that means you've got to pay a great deal of attention to the elephant, your feelings, and to see how they are controlling, how they're influencing, how they're contouring your thoughts. Because if you can start to do that, you can start to see that you're your thoughts, all the thoughts that you might have in your head as you walk down the street, they're not as important as you might think they are. They're not as reliable as you might think they are. They're not as worth sharing as you might think they are. They're actually things that come and go. They're automatically generated. Often they come from your background, your upbringing. The important thing is to be able to look at them and be able to look at the emotions and the sense of where you are, your fear, anxiety, your insecurity, all the things that might lead you to have negative thoughts about something, and just clock them. And so what I learnt through that was to hold my stories lightly. So instead of feeling like the story I had in my head, that's the thing I've got to go and tell everyone about, I started to see that the stories were almost automatically generated. My mind could come up with all sorts of stories, all sorts of ways to justify things. But often what I was really justifying were my own feelings. And the thing I needed to get a better handle on was those feelings, be less thrown around by them, and the sort of the modern bumper sticker parlance, respond, not react. Just get to a point where I could feel the feelings, not blurt them out into the world, try and see whether there was anything really substantial behind them, and try and find the caring and the kindness and love that was sort of lurking somewhere under there.
Can I ask you, in terms of prior to realizing or starting to realize what the issues were for you, looking back, do you see or do you have a definition of what authenticity was for you back then, or, if you to put it crudely, inauthentic nature? What was going on for you then that you now think perhaps now you're being more authentic?
Until I really went through the experience of depression, I was pretty significantly defined by my role as a lawyer, as someone who wanted to be successful, as someone who wanted people to think I was accomplished, as someone who wanted to sort of do well in the world. And a lot of my decisions came from that sort of place. And depression stripped a lot of that away from me and made me feel like a lot of the rewards I might get from following that pathway of life weren't really worth the candle of it. So I needed to find I wouldn't say a more authentic necessarily, but a level of meaning that wasn't simply the sum of all the things I could achieve. So, if I were religious, I would say, some sacred dimension of life that wasn't just life is worthwhile because I won a case. It had to be life is worthwhile because of something else, but I just didn't know what that thing was. And so I wouldn't necessarily say I've become more authentic, but I've found a source of meaning in life that isn't just the sum of all the stuff that I do and achieve by.
And what about interpersonal relationships and personal relationships? Did you feel back then that you were bringing your true, authentic self and forming deep relationships with people? Or was there a barrier there for you?
I certainly had done when I was younger. It was something that was really important to me. So in my sort of late teens, early 20s, my friends and the relationships I had with my family were really important to me, and I felt them quite deeply. I think over the years of sort of pursuing my career and doing things in my professional life, I think the relationships I had with the people around me got somewhat more transactional. It was harder to get below the level of what needed to be done, who was busy, what quick conversation you might have. And so I think I at least had a sense that my connections were less deep, and I was looking for a way somehow to deepen them, knowing that I and many other people in my phase of life are in the midst of raising children, paying off mortgages, doing all the things that a busy life involves. So it can't be you can only have a meaningful relationship with someone if you can have 5 interrupted hours. You're not going to get that. But was there some other way I could go about things?
You talk about a spiritual, not necessarily a religion, or not even necessarily a belief in God, but a human spirituality. And you talk greatly how Stoicism and aspects of Buddhist philosophy have impacted on you. I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but again, something you said that really resonated for me was taking the essence out of a religion or spirituality and make it your own. So basically not following dogma, not following the rules, but seeing what philosophy or thought or idea resonates and accepting that into your life, or including that in your life. So I'm wondering if you could just expound a little bit about Stoicism and Buddhist belief that has helped you.
So that idea of taking the essence and building a life philosophy around it, that's what the book is largely about. And I'm not saying my life philosophy is the right one, and that's what everyone should follow. In fact, I'm saying exactly the opposite, that what was important was that I examined my life closely and came up with something I really did believe in, rather than just getting up and doing stuff and thereby taking as received values the values that attach to all the things that I was doing. What Stoicism and Buddhism did for me was actually reveal how closely aligned their essential philosophies, stripped of any religious trappings, are. The basic Stoic view is focus on stuff that you can control. Don't worry too much about stuff you can't control. There's a lot of stuff that we think is important in life that we can't control. How much money you're going to get, what other people are going to think of you, whether you're going to be successful. What you can control is how wholeheartedly you commit to something, what effort you put in, and what is really motivating you as you do it. So that image of the Stoic archer, you focus at your target, you put the arrow in the right place, you really concentrate, you let it go, and it may hit the target, it may not. That's pretty helpful to a litigator, because you make the submissions as best you can, but you don't decide the case. And getting too caught up in what's going to happen in a judge's decision later is not a recipe for feeling sort of very happy and comfortable in the world. And the other thing Stoicism therefore says is that what you can control are your values. So you've got to spend a lot of time not just having some values, but doing effectively mental exercises, going to the gym mentally and emotionally to try and make sure that you're actually able to live up to those values. And so most Stoic accounts are of people who lived in pretty difficult circumstances, but didn't allow those circumstances to degrade them in the way that they treated other people and in the way they held themselves. Buddhism sort of approaches it from the other end, as it were, but reaching the same sort of conclusion, that what a Buddhist insight sees pretty clearly is how off track we can become when the various mental and emotional poisons, striving, greed, aversion, hatred, and getting just sort of stuck and confused, being numb and detached, can infect us to the point where we're living sort of in an illusion, a little bubble of our own head. It all makes sense to us, but as we go about our lives and do things to other people, we're not seeing the humanity of that other person. We're just seeing the story we're telling. And so Buddhism also tells you, you have to go to that mental and emotional gym. You have to work really hard at seeing how many of your stories are actually motivated by your self-interest, by the stuff that you want, by the stuff that you feel uncomfortable with and therefore you would like to get rid of, and how much is that telling you stories about who deserves what, who's in your in-group, who's in the out-group. They seem to reach a similar place to me, which landed at, those great heroes of history, people like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi. I added Alexei Navalny to my list of people who I thought had gone through that process of feeling all of the big feelings, having all of the strong sense that the world should change, and then keeping that sense of what they thought should change in the world, but not motivated by the us, the them, the people who are right, the people who are wrong, because both those philosophies are largely motivated by that sense that Hannah Arendt expressed most clearly, that much of the evil in the world isn't done by people who think evil things. It's done by people who just can't see other people. They can just see their thoughts, and they're pretty sustained by their thoughts.
My final question would be for you: what is your relationship now, having gone through this process, and particularly writing the book, which I imagine would be quite cathartic? What is your relationship with depression now? Where are you at?
I'm still on the spectrum, as it were. So I'm not a sort of a recovered depressive, as it were, but I write in the book that I prefer to see depression not as a medical problem, but as one end of a spectrum that, might in previous days have been called something like melancholy. Susan Cain in her book called it bittersweetness. I call it the disposition to see the evanescence and fragility of life, that sense that the stuff that we think is so important and so motivating and so overridingly the thing that we should be doing, all of these things, all of these achievements, they will disappear. And so my relationship with depression is, I'm still on that spectrum. That is my fundamental spectrum, but it allows me to see so much of the beauty in other things. And actually, in a couple of places in the book, I referenced the children's song "Puff the Magic Dragon," which I say is a song for adults as well as children. And what I mean by that is, if you really think about what that song is, it's a song of little Jackie who's growing up, and Puff was his childhood friend, and he's growing up, and Puff stays in the cave, and little Jackie goes on. Life is sort of indescribably, unavoidably like that. You pass people, you connect with them, but it's not a permanent communion. It's a passing of connection. And so that my relationship with depression is, I stay off the extreme spectrum, which is not helpful to anyone, but I stay with the spectrum because it's that drives me in all the things I do every day, to seek the connection rather than just the experience of being right and winning.
Well, that's fantastic. Daniel, really appreciate your time, and congratulations on the book. I recommend people read it because it obviously goes into much greater detail and depth than we have been able to today. And thank you for the courage for sharing your story. And so thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Take care.